Okay, so I'm the product owner of CodeProfiler for ABAP, previously known as CodeProfiler. And as you might learn from my colleague Yun, we are now profiling also several kinds of other programming languages. But I'm an old ABAPer, so I'm focusing on scanning ABAP code. Today we're having a basic session on CodeProfiler for ABAP. I see some familiar faces, and we're going to start with old stuff for you. So it's about configuring CodeProfiler, what options do you have, but I'm also going to show you a little of the new stuff which we introduced with our latest CodeProfiler release. So if you have questions, just raise a hand or address them at the end of my speech. So I've a couple of topics collected and put them into this slot. And I just wanted to say, tomorrow I'm going to have also two other slots. One especially focusing on the TMS integration, which we rebuilt in the CodeProfiler for ABAP release 4.5, and also talking about the new Virtual Forge reporting dashboard and the integration of CodeProfiler results into this dashboard. So let's start. I want to talk about the options to customize, to configure CodeProfiler for ABAP in order to influence the scan behavior and also make it fit into your development process. So step one would be we're going to have an overview on the test case configuration, all kinds of customizing which can be done there. Then we're having a couple of bodies in the solution, and I'm going to show you an implementation of one of the bodies. Then giving you a brief glimpse at the TMS integration. As I said, there's a detailed session tomorrow scheduled. And finally, there's a typical question when we introduce CodeProfiler. What do I do with the findings that I have in my old code, and we call this often legacy code or legacy findings, and yeah, let's see how many time is left, and I'm going to give you some ideas of what you can do with these findings. As I said, this is a basic session, so if you're already familiar with CodeProfiler, not all of this stuff will be really new to you. So let's get started with the basics on the test case configuration. So first of all, what kind of configurations do we have? I'm going to show you also our IMG in a second in the system. First step is you can define the severity level of the findings. What do you want to see? Do you want to see everything, or do you want to see only the critical ones? For example, CodeProfiler is reporting a lot of informational findings. For example, we're having test cases like show me all database accesses, so show me all authorization checks. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it will be reported as finding. If you don't want to see it, you can use the configurations for the findings. That's our step one. So we can give a threshold and say everything which is below that threshold, don't show it. It's not of interest for me. Yeah, just to keep the displayed result set small and do not confuse any of the developers. So second step would be we create a custom specific test case group. So you know we are shipping test cases. These are the checks which we're executing on your custom developed code. And all of these checks, they are assigned to a so-called domain. So we're having security, compliance, performance, maintainability, and so on. And then we are taking these test cases and we group them. So for example, we are also having something which is called the TC BISEC, for example. You perhaps have heard of that organization, which is called BISEC. So companies like Virtual Forge, they have a list of the top 11 vulnerabilities, and all test cases which belong to these vulnerabilities, they're put together in a test case group. Now let's I'm going, as you see there on the left, what effect does a test case group have? And I'm going to start my system demo with that. Okay, so let's close that and we go into the system which I prepared here. It's our demo system. So I wrote a tiny little report. You see here there's a selection screen built, and we have start of selection, then there's a subroutine called, it's called run. And in that form routine, something is happening, like a function call. We're having a delete data set. So for those of you already working with CodeProfiler, this is supposed to be a directory traversal finding. So programming something bad on purpose. And some other activities also taking place in here, and closing it with what is supposed to be a leftover debug code. If 1 is larger than 2, do some other stuff. So that's my demo. We're going to deal with this piece of code during our today's session. Now let's have a first quick scan with our CodeProfiler. So I prepared a variant here, and so now I'm scanning this program, and what you see here, that's our view, the finding manager. We're having the test cases which produced findings. You see the test case names here: directory traversal, something which is called missing size subart check after delete data set, missing authority check and reports, and so on. So, and all of these test cases, they produced, each of them produced one finding. The top 3 columns, they explain the findings ratings, and these are the keywords which we also need when we talk about customization of the CodeProfiler further on. So we're having the first column here is the impact. In German it would be Auswirkung. So this is basically predefined by Virtual Forge. So we ship it per test case as best practice. Then we have, well, let's say it's F type. If I make it a little larger, it's finding type. And here it states, for example, flaw, which means how sure is CodeProfiler that this is really a true finding. And then there's the first column, which is the approval level. I'm going to explain the approval level in my next slide's bullet points as well, because this is also subject to a piece of customizing. So now you see that we have findings returned for 6 different test cases. And overall, CodeProfiler now has a little more than 300 test cases. If you perhaps add ABAP-based test cases, even much more than that. So now you could say, well, out of these 300 test cases, I'm not interested in all of them. I just want to focus on a certain set of test cases. And we do this by configuring our own test case group. So, and then we are back to our topic, customization of CodeProfiler. Now, how do we do this? And so we switch into CodeProfiler's IMG. We have the chapter for the test case configuration, and here we have our activity define test case groups. You see those test cases starting with TC. They are predefined and part of CodeProfiler's shipment, but you can also define your own test case groups. I created one for our demo today, and you see that. So I just added some test cases by chance, added them here to our test case group, and just by maintaining this SAP standard maintenance view. Now I can rerun my scan and simply adjust the test case group in the selection screen change from TC all, which is obviously all test cases that CodeProfiler has to offer, to the predefined or now created for this demo purposes test case group. And obviously now some test cases are left out because they're not part of the test case group. So if you have some checks which are not of interest, you just can move them aside and they will not be executed during the scan. Sorry, one click too far. So that would be the second large bullet point: creation of custom specific test case group. Exclude some of the test cases which we ship from your scans. Okay, next one would be configuration, general configuration by test case. So what we can do is, as I said, Virtual Forge is shipping the impact of a test case. And for example, when we have scanned my simple piece of demo code, you've seen that there was a finding for something which was called leftover debug code. By default, the rating for this test case is low. So as we say, well, it cannot be exploited unless someone has debug and replace authorizations. But we do have customers who say, well, but it's a piece of ugly code, so I don't want it to be low, but I want it to be impact high. So you can override what we are saying with your own values for the test case's impact. So that's the next activity which we can do also in the IMG. So with respect to the time, I'm going to skip this, but it's just clicking and changing it from low to high, and then you rescan and you see the value has changed. Okay, so now I would like to focus a little on this point here, the first column which we saw in the finding manager, the approval level. So now we need to explain a little. Let's check if this is working. Yeah, it's working. Okay, so if we talk, no, other way around. We scan our code and the patterns which belong to the test cases, they produce a hit. And CodeProfiler is creating what is called a finding. Finding is not necessarily a bad thing and doesn't even mean that you need to correct your code. What we're saying is that you need to check all of the findings which have a certain rating. Now, how do we make this up? Every finding which is created is sorted into this table. You see here, one column is the finding type. We see both of these columns in the finding manager as well. And the other is the impact. So finding type and impact. Again, impact is, well, how bad can it be if someone exploits this? Or in performance, how bad can the performance impact be of this coding snippet? And the finding type is how sure is CodeProfiler that it's a true finding. Okay, so every finding which is created, it is rated in both of these categories, and so by that sorted into this table. Now, what we are thinking in terms of calculating the approval level is as follows. We are reading it like, well, first look at all of the flaws, because CodeProfiler is saying, I'm sure that this is true, and then go further to the right, continue with a pod A, pod B, and so on. So we're bringing it into this sorting, and from here, now we are drawing two dotted lines. Here's the first dotted line, and here's the second one. Above the dotted line, we're calling this mandatory, or if you talk about street light, traffic lights, that's the red area. Then we have a section which we mark as optional, would be yellow, and some just for informational areas, that's the green area. And what we are then saying is, well, if you do, for example, an audit, that's the area which you start really working on, again, looking in the source code with using your eyes and so on. Now, these lines, as you see it here, especially the first dotted line is important because that's the relevant one for the TMS integration. As soon as we have a finding which is rated as mandatory, our TMS integration will block the transport and say, well, either you go back and fix it, or you need to go through the approval process. So that's why this approval level is important here. What we can do, and as we are talking about customization today, is we can move these dotted lines. And I'm going to give you an example. So we're having two examples on that slide here. So first one would be a test case which we call generic ABAP module call, where we say, well, originally the line would be exactly here, but I want to be more strict than VirtualForge is shipping with the standard settings. So I want to produce more mandatory findings, even if CodeProfiler says, well, it's a potential A, I still want to get a mandatory finding in return. Okay, so that's the idea, like be a little more strict than VirtualForge is shipping. And this one would be, we're talking about a test case OS command injection. So someone is calling OS commands out of his ABAP programming, and you could say, well, it's against our development policies. And I don't care what CodeProfiler is giving as a rating here. Everything should be mandatory. So just move the first dotted line straight to the bottom, and then we will have a mandatory finding for all of the combinations. Now, how do we execute this in the system? So just preparing my setup for the before status again, and so I'm looking for this one here, the finding for missing size subparty check after delete dataset. CodeProfiler is currently giving me a rating which is flaw high, and this is mapped to mandatory. Now what I say is, well, I want to keep the setting for security and compliance. I want to stick with VirtualForge. For all the other domains, like you see, this is part of robustness. I want to work on that, and I want to get an optional finding for this. So I want to be less restrictive than VirtualForge standard settings are. What I can do is I go back into the IMG, and the activity is here. So that's the, again, if you know how to use a maintenance view, you can do this. So the number which we're talking about is this one, missing size subparty check after delete dataset. So we're going to change that one. And here you see, in this top area, I'm not sure if you can read it, so here it states mandatory, use default, and optional, use default. So what is the default configuration of VirtualForge? You can read it here. So it states mandatory should be flaw high, and potential A low should be the second dotted line. And then you see here all combinations and how they would be mapped to the approval levels. Now what I was telling you, I want to be less restrictive. I don't want to have mandatory findings for this test case. So what I could do is I change the first dotted line to not used, press enter, and you see that here it changed. Now we only have optional findings as a maximum. So let's save it. Okay, it's not transported, fine. And let's check, update scenario should already be, no, I need to reopen the CodeProfiler. rerun my scan. Okay, so now what we see here, there's my finding for missing the isopathy check. The rating is still flaw very high. So CodeProfiler is giving it still the same result. But now as we changed our customizing, it is mapped as an optional finding. Meaning if you have something like this in code on your transport, we would let you through. Oh, no. Okay, so again, this is the approval level, and think of it as a function of finding type and impact. By default, all of the test cases work with finding type flaw very high and high. In combination, this is mapped to mandatory, and if you want to change that, you can do it per test case in our IMG. Okay. So next, configuration topic. What I was showing you until now is valid for all of the test cases. So for each of the test cases, you can override our given impact. You can override the given approval level customization. And then there are some test cases which have special customizing. And you see a large list in here. For example, starting with setting some thresholds, especially in the maintainability area, where we have test cases like reporting classes with too many methods or function groups with too many modules. Well, then it's a question, what is too many? And you can configure that just by entering a value in our IMG. Or another example in that area is we have a test case saying usage of extensive joins. So if you program a database select based on a join, then, for example, when you have more than 5 joins, 5 tables in that join, it's hard to read. Or perhaps you say, I want to have only 3 as a maximum. So now you can configure that value, and I think as a default we're shipping more than 5 tables in a join, then you get a finding. But you could also go to 7 if it's fitting you better. So then we have another thing which I want to show you in a demo. That would be, I forgot to say, definition of mitigation modules. So a lot of test cases see the call of other programming units like function modules or methods as a countermeasure. So for example, if you programmed an own function module which is performing an authority check and you place this function module in all of your executable reports, you can say, well, dear CodeProfiler, you should recognize this as a valid authorization method. And then you place it into a customizing for what we call mitigation modules. Okay, so that's the topic number 2. Number 3 would be list critical and unwanted or unwanted modules. So for example, what is that? So I'm going to show you our list also in a second. Let's say there is some function modules in SAP which are rather critical, and you should think to forbid that they are used in your custom code. For example, there's a function module which is removing all change documents from your system. You should not do this in your productive system because you lose auditing capabilities. You can no longer say who did what. Yeah. So, and we're having a test case which is just, well, receiving this list of unwanted functions or unwanted methods and so on, and giving you a finding for all of the usages of these methods. Another use case I'm going to show you now in the system is, well, there's a list of function modules where SAP is saying, do not use it, it's obsolete. So you should not use it in your custom code. And we're having this, of course, it's a made-up example in my demo. Okay, so as you see here, I'm using a function module which is called table authority, and as soon as you place this function module using the pattern feature here in your code, also the pattern feature will tell you, well, beware, this function module is obsolete, you should not use it. So what we could do now is we place this function module in the list of unwanted modules and then receive a finding for it. And configuration of critical module, that's here. So as a first step, we just add our example here, function module, table authority. Now I can say to which domain this shall be assigned, because this is obsolete. Well, I would assign it to maintainability, and I can also give it an impact. For example, if I choose high, a priority high impact finding will be created. Okay, so now let's try scanning again. And you see that we received a new finding, which is called usage of critical ABAP modules, maintainability, and in brackets customized. If you navigate into the details of the finding manager will also tell you, well, exactly which of the customized modules is really used in here, so you do not need to navigate into the source code to find out which module caused the finding. And for this area of obsolete function modules, you see that there is another activity in this area, which is saying, well, add obsolete SAP functions to critical modules. And as this is depending onto your system patch level, installation level, what modules you are using, we cannot ship a list, but we're having a small activity here. If you execute that one, I could say, well, create me a list of all function modules which are marked as obsolete by SAP and add them to that list. And then you're having a mechanism to find all the places in your custom code where you're calling something from SAP which is marked as obsolete. Okay, so that would be the configuration options which you have in this area. Okay. So let's finish this specific part off. Okay, what we also can do is mark namespaces as custom namespaces or third party, because if you're programming in a corporation and you reserved an own namespace like we have, for example, like our /vforge, and you're responsible for that namespace, then you want to treat certain findings differently than findings which are coming from SAP or a third-party vendor, because you cannot do anything to really fix it. Yeah? If you find something in a third-party vendor's software, you need to address him and say, well, please fix it and ship me the correction. If it's your code, you can fix it on your own. So for example, we're having a test case which is called direct database modifications, and the impact of a finding differs whether it's a database table of yours or of a third party or from the SAP. So for example, if you're doing an update on table MARA for Material Master or BISEC from some financials, it will be rated as a very high thing. If it's a table from your namespace, it will be rated as a medium thing. Okay, but you can control if that's the case. And if you registered own namespaces, added to this piece of customizing. Okay, so next topic is data leakage prevention. It's a complete own topic. Actually, there is a speech going on right now, bad timing to be honest, which is dealing with data leakage prevention. So you define critical data and you see all of the pieces in your code where this data is read and brought out of the system. Okay, so that's basically impact of database tables. I already had that. For example, you can say Mara is very critical. Tables in your set namespace is not so critical. Same goes to transactions and also critical domains and data elements. Okay, so this is specific to some selected test cases and not for all of the test cases. Now let's have a look at what can I do to change CodeProfiler's behavior, but not customizing, but in terms of programming. So as I said, we're having some bodies in our scan process, and the first one is we called it adjustment of the scan scope. So the idea is you start your CodeProfiler scan, for example on package level, and then we're going and selecting all of the objects which are in these packages. Then you have a special rule. For example, you want to exclude all of the objects from being scanned which have the flag Unicode enabled switched to off. We had this situation in a customer project. So then you can do an implementation of that body and remove all of these specific objects from the scan list. Okay, so you can change what we would extract and send to our scan engine. Or put it another way, for example, you want to add certain objects. We didn't have that situation already, but it is also possible. Okay, so the second one is implement a custom specific selection screen. So the idea is, you know CodeProfiler Cockpit, and then there you can select objects on package level, on object level, by transport, BW objects, and some other thing which are LSMW objects. So if this all doesn't fit your situation, then you can write your own object selection logic, including an own selection screen. So for example, and that's what I'm programmed as a demo, is you're organizing your developments in projects, giving it a project name and a description, and then you add development objects to these projects. And for example, you want to transport these things together. Yeah, could be an example. Now it would be a nice thing if you have the option to scan everything which is on a specific project. So your extraction logic would be the user should enter the project name, then you look up into a that table and find a list of programs and transports and send them programs and function modules and classes and send them to the scanning machine. Yeah, that's the idea of that body. Now how does this look like? As I said, I prepared a small demo for that. So I created two small tables. One is called project def for project define. You see here that there's a key and a description inside. And I defined 3 projects. Project 1, project 2, project object oriented. So these are my 3 projects. And then I have a second table in which I assign development objects to these projects, and just adding some demo data. As you see here for project 1, I said, well, it should consist of a function group and 2 programs, demo 01, demo 02, and so on. Now, my idea is that I want to have on the CodeProfiler selection screen the option to enter project 1, and all of these 3 things should be selected automatically and sent to CodeProfiler for scanning. Okay, and as you see here, so I created this implementation of the corresponding body. We set a new tab strip where it says CForge 2017 demo. And what you see in this subscreen now could be an implementation of that body in your system. So it's that code. And here I can pick up my project 1, for example, and say, well, send all of these 3 objects. Okay, need to give a new number. Send all of these 3 objects now for scanning, receiving also a lot of results. And as you see here, well, it's exactly what was in the database table. Now, how does this work? Let's go back to our IMG. You find these 2 bodies we were talking about until now right here in the body folder, and here it says enhance object selection in cockpit. Let's have a look. You see, here's my implementation, vForge CP demo, and yeah, if you ever implemented a body, it's not really a big deal. What you need to do is you need to specify, on the one hand, the DynPro, in which the end user is entering the project name, and then you need to give an implementing class, which has 2 methods. One is used for getting the headline for the tab strip, so where it says CForge 2017 demo, and the other is get data from cell screen. So here you see that's my coding, which I implement. It's only like 20 lines to do this. Call function module to receive the data from the DynPro, and then adding the data into a returning table. Pretty simple. It's just to show you that it's possible, and you can implement your own logics for object selection in this additional tab strip. Okay, so let's finish this one off. Okay. The last area where we have bodies in place is the topic of user assignment. And one area where we need this user assignment is in the TMS integration. So currently we ship only a flat list in which you place users on it, and these users are then taken during the TMS approval workflow as approvers. And if I ask you, well, how would you define who is the right person to approve that a transport can go through? You would perhaps describe me a logic, but it will completely differ from the one who's sitting next to you. So that's why we offer a body here, and we help you then to implement your custom-specific logic to retrieve the approval during the TMS workflow. And as I said, TMS workflow we will also deal in very much detail tomorrow in a more expert session. Okay, a glimpse ahead for that topic, TMS integration. And I'm bringing this up now because it's also a part of how can you adjust the CodeProfiler behavior. And it's part of the TMS checks. And the checks which are executed if a developer tries to release his task. And yeah, the example is really taken from a customer requirement. I was telling you, if you release a task or transport, CodeProfiler checks are running and we let you pass as soon as there is no mandatory finding. If you find one mandatory finding, you will be blocked and you need to go through the approval, or you go back and fix it. Now we had customers saying, well, I want to block always. Either if there are only yellow findings or if there are no findings, I want to block always. Okay? And we can do this also with the new TMS integration, which we made available with CodeProfiler 4.5. So what you see here is that's the new starting screen for the TMS integration. And what's of most importance is that we have one workflow, one central checking routine, and into this checking routine we can add not only the CodeProfiler checks, which will be there by default, but we can also add other checks. For example, what you see here in the second line would be, well, add transport profiler checks to that. And this framework is open. You can add own checks to that. So for example, if you have some custom-specific checks for naming conventions, if you have some custom-specific checks for documentation which must be done and attached to the transport object, or whatever you have, you could think about, well, then add a new line into this screen which you're seeing right here, and then you have the option to have it executed always. And also, as I said, if you want to block it all the time, then you simply do a small implementation and say, well, just return a red light, and then the developer is forced to go through the workflow. How this is working will be shown tomorrow in the detailed session. Yeah, I'm running a little out of time. So I would say before we need to finish and I'm thrown out of this room, I would like to give you the option to ask a couple of questions, if you have some. Otherwise, I say thank you very much. If you want to see something in detail or discuss anything, feel free to contact me and we go through a system demo. Thanks a lot.